trigger happy and I give less than a fuck. Love me or hate me, I'ma show enough, rip shit up. It's Mr. Nothing, nice on a mic stand. Mic in the left and the zest in my right hand. I took a puff, had enough now, hold up. If that was Indo, niggas getting rolled up.
What's going on, folks? This is Acid Roots. I'm going to review Missy Elliott's second album, The Real World. Now, this came on the heels of her 1997 album, Super Duper Fly. And basically, this was an improvement, supposedly, over that. But it didn't quite have, like, the fury, in my opinion, of Miss E So Addictive. It's definitely pretty promoted well. It's definitely promoted pretty well. I feel like, especially the Hot Boys song did particularly outstanding. That's one of Missy Elliott's highest charting songs. Maybe the remix, I don't know if the remix had a different beat, but that version of the song did real well. And like Missy kind of had a lot of good things going for her because she was going on to become a breakout star. This helped mold her, but unfortunately, I feel like the production is so prehistoric that it just really kind of is like almost like a real kind of paltry way of listening to it. I feel like really anything past Under Construction for Missy Elliott, like I feel like anything past Under Construction for Missy Elliott just did outstanding. She only did 3 projects after Under Construction, but anything past her 2002 album really kind of showcased how well she fit the 2000s sound in a more glossy production. She worked with Timbaland just about every one of her albums, but I kind of feel like this one, Timbaland was still kind of in the lab more and kind of was etching out what would become his trademark sound later. Like I felt like he didn't have this problem as much on Miss E So Addictive from 2001 with hits like Get Your Freak On and 1 Minute Man with Ludacris, but I really feel like for the most part Timbaland's productions are just kind of not even a mixed bag at this point. I mean, they stand to what they are, but they really kind of remind me of just like rehashes of like the type sound that was kind of typical of late 90s R&B stuff like TLC, Destiny's Child, and Aaliyah and Bad Cases, that type stuff. I mean, that was just kind of the way that R&B kind of was, is more in that kind of sense. If you're looking for songs like Independent Woman by Destiny's Child and No Scrubs by TLC and that type stuff, I kind of feel like that's kind of the department of that relative production. Now, in some cases, that sort of narrative kind of works just because there are some engaging moments. And I like seeing Missy in kind of like earlier kind of R&B renditions of club music, kind of similar to like Genuine's Pony and that type stuff and that sort of vibe. But unfortunately, these productions just severely lack the gloss that the 2000s version of R&B went on to have. And that's kind of, I've talked about it before, how I felt like things like B2K and Beyonce when she went solo really helped shape out R&B, but because Missy kind of does R&B flavored rap, it kind of reaches a point where Missy is, at least in the club, she doesn't quite make as many dance numbers as she would later on, but I do feel like these kind of like glossy kind of hip hop R&B flavored kind of club type music does have a light tinge to it, to where it's at least probably some of the more palatable stuff I'll listen to from late 90s R&B, which is just not as frequent as I'd care to admit. But yeah, so I would go ahead and say that the first single is She's a Bitch, and this kind of has like a real kind of smoky kind of beat. I mean, it just has like this kind of plodding, thumping piano type beat in there, which sounds like you've had about 6 or 7 blunts to the head or something like that, swishers to the head, that type stuff, just to kind of be able to say it just feels like a really kind of cooked kind of song. I like seeing Missy on this kind of vibe, just because I didn't know this about Missy Elliott at first, but she is kind of a smoker, so she probably had her share of stogies and that type of stuff to kind of puff on in the club and that type of stuff. It just works as like a real good, to me this is probably one of the best beats on the whole album. It just works. This is the kind of beat I would have liked if it would have just had a lot of slinky and kind of more like low key kind of secondary kind of production like this. I definitely would have said that it would have worked, but for what it is, this is a great song. I definitely appreciate it. All in My Grill really reminds me of like Independent Woman by Destiny's Child. I want to say that that song came out around the same time as when Destiny's Child dropped it. It might not be called Independent Woman, it might just be called Independent. I don't really remember. There were a lot of independent women kind of songs around that time. A lot of those from like the late 90s, early 2000s. A lot of women kind of stepping out and showcasing like their kind of resilience and that type stuff. But I feel like this song kind of has a taste of that, where Missy's kind of questioning why you're all up on her inner grill and that type of stuff, questioning her and all up in her face and stuff. And it works for what it is. I mean, this could be a club song. I kind of feel like this is kind of where you're in like a dance floor or a dance club or a bar or something, and you're in the approach and that type of stuff, and you're it's kind of more introductory in a lot of senses. But I really feel like Big Boy did not suit this song. He just really rapped way too quickly. I wish he would have been more kind of smooth and content like he used to be, or he would be later on, like the way he was on like later Outcast records, like Miss Jackson and some of that. He just had a lot more calm and collective. I mean, normally, Big Boy is cool as a cucumber, but he just wasn't on this song. He just rapped way too fast, and it just was kind of awkward on there. But Missy did a great job. I did like the production on here. Not as good as She's a Bitch, but it does remind me a lot of Independent Woman. And then Hot Boys kind of has like that. This one is definitely a club beat. I feel like this could be a dance club beat. It's just so the production is really not that immediate. It just really kind of feels like more of like just focusing kind of on the dancing more so than actually listening to it, where you're kind of just it has to do more with mingling more so than most music that I kind of review, and sort of the sense of kind of going along with it. It's just kind of like this is more background music, club music. I just kind of feel like Misty's singing is good on here, and she has a very kind of melodic way of going about it, and it works well. But just to kind of say, like, I do feel like the production is definitely not as good as not as good as She's a Bitch, and I feel like All in My Grill is probably just a hair or two better also. But I mean, all three of the singles are great, but it just is kind of like I really feel like there's just so muddled and kind of secondary and kind of like B list. I don't feel like these are A list beats. I mean, for what it was in like 90s R&B, I feel like it kind of the thing about it was it was kind of trailblazing at this time and carving out a lane where we're kind of reaching a point where R&B kind of is more stepping out and dance floors and dance clubs and bars and VIP sessions and bottle popping and that sort of stuff. But, you know, paying attention to other club songs from like the late 90s, like Hypnotize and California Love, Pony by Genuine, and some of those records. Like I want to say like a couple other ones like How Do You Want It and some of those records. I really feel like, obviously not being East or West Coast rap as far as doing that, but it's just interesting kind of seeing, because I forget where Missy Elliott's from. I want to say maybe New York or something, but just kind of paying attention to how like club music that didn't have like a coast to it, but just in terms of that context, I do feel like there was at least shapeliness to R&B to where the production probably could have been. I mean, I like it for what it is, but like I said, it's this very 85% kind of B list kind of stuff, you know. But really, so the rest of this album is not very noteworthy at all. I don't really feel like going in too much, just because for the most part I was pretty disappointed just with like the presentation for most of the way these beats were. I feel like when I said that the singles were 85% kind of B list, 84-85% range, I feel like the rest of the album is way lower than that. It's not even noteworthy to really designate as far as much of remarks as far as making towards it. I feel like the only real song that had any other bite towards it, and even with the star-studded guest that it had, was just Stickin' Chickens with Aaliyah and DeBrat. I definitely was proud getting an Aaliyah and Missy Elliott song just because they had a good chemistry and a good bond, and adding DeBrat on there helped also. All three of them did great. Aaliyah did a real melodic verse, and Missy Elliott matched her with a sing-songy verse of her own. So it really, that song, to learn more about that was kind of like that one was kind of more of like a dance bop. I definitely feel like that's a song that you can get up and shake something to, shake your ass to, that type stuff. I mean, I really feel like that's kind of a stunting song for the women, where they get up and do their thing and that type stuff. I mean, all three of them, like I said, did great on there, so it's just good to hear that. But apart from that, there's really nothing else that kind of goes along with it. I mean, I felt like, Lil Kim should have been more on just on the interludes. Redman didn't do well. Eminem, I can at least say him and the lyrics, getting him from his 1999 Slim Shady LP ways was great. but I really feel like I was quite disappointed with the fact that the production was just so bad. I mean, I felt like if he would have been on like a record like Stickin' Chickens or She's a Bitch, I would have loved Eminem to have been on like a She's a Bitch remix. He probably would have torn that beat apart, especially him back in 1999, but it just was like, eh. I didn't really see the point to having him on like a song like that. I mean, there was nothing noteworthy across this whole course of project. I feel like three good singles, which are just great dance club numbers and just about going about, and then plus a solid, just an excellent Aaliyah cameo, plus Debrat on there just worked, and that's about what you had. Because in some cases there were albums even as far out as 1999 where just getting two or three singles, that's enough to warrant a purchase, where you didn't need album cuts. Where that's kind of the thing about the 90s is, 90s albums just were not completely 90s albums were not completely filled out as far as doing like album cuts and trying to make classics. If you got two or three singles, especially if they charted real high, that's all you got. But just to kind of say, I really kind of feel like, as far as that context kind of goes, it just makes for kind of an underperforming kind of project. I mean, it carved out lanes and it was building upon something that needed to be built upon. But the problem with it is most of the album is kind of bunk in quite a severe way. I'm gonna give this album a 3.5 out of 10. I feel like me liking 4 songs out of 13. That's pretty subpar. I mean, I at least give Missy credit for the three hit singles and how that kind of worked, but a lot of this just really did not stand up to snuff at all, and I just felt like it was very lukewarm, at least in that. To say at most it felt very lukewarm, so that's kind of the situation. But the social score I will give like a 7.5 or an 8, just because I'll give the social score a 7.5 or an 8, just because three hit singles really did quite well, and I feel like that kind of established things. I feel like that really established things as far as trying to do that sort of stuff, but unfortunately, it just really kind of is an undercooked as a whole project. So that's just kind of the situation. But on top of that, I would have to say, like, in terms of the future, Missy Elliott has not dropped a project since 2019's Iconology EP. But I just kind of feel like, as far as that's kind of concerned, I mean, this is warranted of a purchase just because Missy Elliott has personality and she always manages to nail the singles. But there is just really absolutely nothing apart from the Aaliyah song besides the singles. That's just something to know. So